All right, so first we're going to start with some news, and then we'll get into the storylines. The big news coming out of yesterday, Kellen Moore, officially the head coach of the New Orleans Saints, the Super Bowl winning offensive coordinator of the Philadelphia Eagles, now in New Orleans. And they waited. They're the last team, the 32nd team here, to have a head coach. Your thoughts on Kellen Moore going with the Saints?
Yeah, last team, it did feel a lot like this was a done deal, that they were, this was agreed on a while ago, but obviously you had to wait for Kellen Moore to get through a Super Bowl first before you could do the thing officially. It also felt a lot like, the Saints didn't seem to have a ton of options. I mean, this felt like a job that not too many people wanted. And when you look at their sort of position, it kind of makes sense, right? They're trapped in this world where they've got Derek Carr. That hasn't worked particularly well. The other options are Spencer Rattler, a mid-round quarterback with some talent, but who hasn't exactly established anything in the time we've seen him. They're not, in a tremendous position to grab a quarterback at the top of the draft. This is not a team with a top 3 pick or whatever. So if you are particularly an offensive-minded coach, if you're a Kellen Moore or, a Ben Johnson at the other end of the spectrum, the guys that were the very, very top of the pile in terms of hot coaching tickets this offseason, you're looking at this and you're like, what is my pathway to making this good quickly? And, the Saints don't have a particularly great one. Like, if ownership is going to give you buy-in and time and patience and all that kind of thing, okay, but you're not looking at this and saying, yeah, this is a quick turnaround, a quick fix.
No, it's definitely not. All the reports, by the way, sounds like, maybe by the time you're listening to this, Brandon Staley might be
Yeah.
hired as the defensive coordinator. I think that's an interesting combination. This happens all the time when we're analyzing coaches, right? Brandon Staley did not have a great head coaching tenure with the Chargers, but he was a very good defensive coordinator. And again, the Chargers defense probably underachieved relative to what they should have done talent-wise, even under Brandon Staley. But he got the job because he led an outstanding Rams defense, and at the time was running the Fangio plus type of defense, and it was forward-looking, and it was futuristic defense basically that was supposed to be a great fit with the Chargers. And a lot of times we end up, dragging that guy down. Oh, he was a bad head coach. But, you got like Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn had a, sour taste at the end of his head coaching run with the Falcons, then became one of the best defensive coordinators again in the NFL for the Cowboys. So I think it's a good pairing having Kellen Moore and Brandon Staley here. Plus, you do get that head coaching experience of Staley for a first-time head coach in Kellen Moore.
Yeah, that's an underrated element of it. I do think, obviously there's risk attached to bringing in a guy like Staley whose defense when he was with the Chargers was atrocious. It wasn't just it didn't maximize the talent of the people there, the Joey Bosa's, the Derwin James of the world. It was awful. It was a bad defense, and ultimately, as much as anything else, that was what got him eventually fired. But what's interesting is, as you said, number one, he comes from that Fangio tree, and obviously, as we've just seen, the Vic Fangio defense is as strong as it's ever been in overall terms. Vic Fangio, the godfather, the architect of it, just led the Eagles to this absolutely dominant display in the Super Bowl. But also, Staley has done what, these guys don't always do once they've sort of had a shot and go back. Like, he went to a different defense, went to a different system, like went to San Francisco and under Kyle Shanahan, obviously, as an assistant there, and was exposed to a very different type of defense. Like, this is not it wasn't the Vic Fangio scheme. So he's got experience in, what is still maybe the defense du jour, the most popular or the most cutting edge defense right now. And he's had experience in a different defensive system. So, if he was using that year to kind of reset, to learn again, to improve himself, if you like, in kind of weird terms, maybe he can come back and be a really, really good defensive coordinator again, which, as you said, was what he was before he got the head coach chance.
And by the way, Kellen Moore was Brandon Staley's offensive coordinator just a couple of years ago as well. So they've, been on the other side of this before. So it's not like they haven't worked together. Kellen was the offensive coordinator for the Chargers. I also think it's interesting if you're trying to define what Kellen Moore as a coordinator, there's not, I don't think there's like a defining characteristic. We're not talking about this is a McVay guy, this is a Shanahan guy, this is a run heavy guy, this is a pass heavy guy. I remember a couple of years ago coming out of Dallas, it was like Kellen Moore's run pass splits, everything was like dead smack in the
Right.
middle. So he doesn't, and that's fine. Like, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. It's just we can't come out here and say, here's the thing he's going to do with the Saints. I think what we've seen is, he had adapted to what Philadelphia did. He adapted to what the Chargers were doing with Justin Herbert. I think that's more of the defining characteristic of Kellen Moore is kind of adjusting to what his personnel is on the field. And so it's tough to say, here's exactly what you're going to see on the field from the Saints offense.
He's also a guy that was pegged like immediately in his career, even when he was still playing, as like, this is a future head coach, right? Like, this is a guy who's going to be a coach in the NFL at some point. And when people say that about you that early in your career, it's not because of like X's and O's acumen, right? It's not because like, oh, this guy's football brain is better than anybody else I've ever come across. Like, you're not running into mini McVeys when you're saying that. What they mean when they say that is like, this guy, it's leadership, right? It's the intangible stuff. It's all the stuff that nobody really gets a good handle on until they're in the job. So if that's accurate, because Kellen Moore is interesting because like everywhere he's been, when he's left, there's been like everyone is happy that he's gone. And yet when he comes somewhere, he almost always upgrades it quickly, right? Like the Eagles this year. They brought in Kellen Moore as like a steady hand because when they lost both coordinators last season, the whole thing fell off the map and was a disaster. The offense fell apart. The defense fell apart. The entire team ran aground late last year and had one of the most spectacular collapses ever. So Vic Fangio comes in. Obviously, that's a total turnaround, right? They've gone from terrible to one of the best defenses in the NFL, if not the best. The offense hasn't been as spectacular a turnaround, but it's definitely been a bump back up the rankings. And it's a good unit again. Kellen Moore is a very reliable, steady hand, but he's not sort of an X's and O's savant, right? It's not like you're bringing in the Kyle Shanahan as a guy who's, running this pioneering system that everything's going to be good. You're hiring Kellen Moore because of the sort of that stuff, right? He's the head. He's always been a head coach in waiting, and let's hope that the X's and O's are good enough that part is good. Like, I'm fascinated to see, was that right? Like, was the fact that we've identified this guy basically since he was a college quarterback as being a future head coach? Well, now he's a head coach, like a current head coach. How does that go?
On a personal note, I absolutely loved watching Kellen Moore play football. I am still convinced, Sam,
Derek Carr
that
probably
he could. Well, no, I saw that box score when Carr was young in those games. But Kellen Moore going up against Oregon, going up against Virginia Tech, always elevating his team at Boise State, doing it with like a middle school caliber arm. That was my favorite thing. The guy had the velocity of a 12-year-old, but he always knew where to go with the ball, always got the job done. He has a 400-yard passing game in the NFL. I am convinced that he could have been like put together a reasonable starting season, like a Gardner Minshew style season in the NFL as a starter. And it would have been fun because he probably had the worst arm of any starting quarterback I think I've ever seen in the NFL. But he won with anticipation, right? So I like watching those extremes because, like, the late Ryan Mallett was coming out at the same time, who was the opposite, right? Cannon, no anticipation, no touch. I love watching those extremes to just see if they could overcome their limitations. Kellen Moore was doing it a little bit. He had pretty good preseason games with the Cowboys, and plus, like I said, that 400-yard game one time as a spot starter.
Yeah. I mean, when you consider how long teams persist with guys that have shown basically nothing but have the tools, right? Like the opposite is true for guys that don't have the tools. You can actually show a reasonable amount, but if it's not enough, they're just going to look at very small human with a noodle arm and be like, look, this is just not working, right? Even if I understand you have a 400-yard game on your resume already, but it's just not going to happen long term. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.